Hello everyone, in this presentation we're going to be going through the basics of overland search and rescue, specifically looking at hikeouts and other non-roadside sorts of incidents as we see in our district with the Golden Gate Fire Department. Please note this is specific to Golden Gate Fire, covering specifics of our district, how we operate, and what our SOPs and SOGs look like for these sorts of incidents. Our overview, we're going to talk about how backcountry operations work and what we generally do and what we end up seeing. We're going to talk about the basic principles of overland search and rescue operations themselves. We're going to talk about search tactics and techniques, things we use to locate the missing persons, and then the concept of operations for the two-team system, search team and a rescue team. First, we'll start with a discussion on operations in the backcountry. Notably a background on what it is that we do, how do we get these calls, and why do we tend to see these calls, and what their most common mechanism of injury is. Why? Significant portion of our district is park or open space. We have about 50 square miles of total land area, and I don't know the specifics, but I'd wager more than half of it is some variety of open space, be it a Jefferson County Park, Golden Gate State Park, some other wild area like that. A large number of calls end up being at these parks. People get hurt. It's something that happens, especially mountain bikers, hikers, things like that. These are inherently risky activities that people are engaged in, so people are going to get hurt. And it's important to know that operations away from the roadway are inherently more complex and challenging. It's just kind of unavoidable. If we can't immediately walk over to the truck and grab something, that means that we have to think through everything that we're doing. If we can't just immediately wheel the patient straight into the ambulance and take the cot from the ambulance to the patient's side and back to the ambulance very, very easily, like on pavement, it's going to be more challenging and involve a lot more work and a lot more personnel. So we talked a bit about where. This kind of overview map that we see here, we have White Ranch Open Space Park, Mount Galbraith Open Space Park, Centennial Cone Open Space Park, and then Douglas Mountain has all been acquired by Jefferson County. It's in the future development planning and expansion right now. So it's Jefferson County right now, but not yet in service for the public. We expect that to happen in the future. We also have Golden Gate State Park. It's not formally part of our district. It's not formally part of anyone's district. But we share the jurisdiction with Timberline, so we go on a lot of calls, especially in the Jefferson County side of that park. We can also expect mutual aid from Golden or Timberline, or expect to go on mutual aid to Golden or Timberline for large complex incidents in their districts, especially ones that are near us. Clear Creek Canyon Park is kind of the nearby one. It's a target hazard. We could also see something on North Table, things like that, where we would be a useful asset to them and we need to be prepared to go on those incidents. Typical call, what do we see? It's usually an injured hiker or a cyclist. That's the primary users of our parks. These are the people who are out there most weekends, out and about, recreating in the outdoors. So what do we see? Sprained ankles, kind of the most common one. Not all of them need a 911 call and us to medevac them over the ground and it being a total mess. That's less common for a 911, very common for how people are actually getting hurt. Broken clavicles, kind of the most common mechanism. This is someone falling forward. They stick their arms straight out and they don't bend their elbows when they hit the ground. So all that force is transmitted into the collarbone. So you feel like neck, okay. Go to the sides, those bony protuberances. That's the clavicle. Clavicle fractures with less than 10 pounds of force. I don't remember the exact number, but it's pretty weak. It's a good fail point. Luckily, these patients, it's going to hurt, but they can walk out. We can treat it pretty easily. Also expect to see other fall type injuries. So folks who slip and fall a little ways down a hill. People who are intoxicated fall a little ways down a hill, things like that. We also will see medicals, bites, and environmental injuries. Environmental injuries, that's both hypothermia and hyperthermia, both varieties of hyperthermia we've seen. Bites, we've seen snake bites. We've had 2 really significant snake bite calls at Mount Galbraith. We can expect probably more snake bites in the future. We'll also see other occasional medicals. Someone who's hiking not accustomed to the altitude, some sort of issue like that, end up with some shortness of breath and difficulty breathing or chest pains or something like that. All very legitimate reasons to need to go out and get them. Typically open space parks, most commonly on trail. Luckily, that makes this a lot more straightforward and a lot easier for a good majority percentage of our calls. They're on trail and we don't have to panic about finding them too much. So quickly going through some terminology. Search area, that's defined as the area that we are designating and naming for searching. We can use division names, Alpha through Zulu. We can use other names that make sense. It's a good way to divide up areas and assign them to search teams. The PLS, point on the map where the victim was last positively identified. Like, oh, this person saw Joe Smith at this trailhead junction when he asked which way to go. Then that person told us they saw him at that junction. That is a point last seen for sure. Last known position is the point on the map where the victim can be identified as being potentially located. So we find footprints, we find clothing. That's where a cell ping, if they call 911, things like that. Any of that, that's all the last known position, the LKP for that individual. Then there's the POD, probability of detection. This is the likelihood of finding the victim given the searching parameters and the techniques that we're using. We'll see the POD defined for a handful of search tactics just to kind of discuss their relative effectiveness. What's a very effective search tactic? What is a not so thorough but potentially equally as effective search tactic? We'll cover that in just a few minutes. So what's our equipment loadout looking like for these kind of calls? Fundamentally, we need to know that this response is different than going to a rec or a medical or anything like that. You have to have that in mind when we get the call. As you're gathering your gear and getting out the door, you got to know what you're going to and what exactly we're planning on doing. First and foremost, structure gear is generally inappropriate for these incidents. Particularly structure pants and boots. Very, very bad choice. You're going to have a long, miserable day if you wore your structure boots to these kind of incidents and you have to walk on the order of several miles in them, especially if you're walking over uneven terrain, etc. It'll be bad enough where you're not going to enjoy it, and it may be bad enough that you're going to complicate the operation because you're no longer useful. You can't walk because you've got blisters, you've got some kind of injury like that as a result of improper footwear. So structure gear, not a good choice. Structure coats aren't a bad, terrible choice if it's getting chilly, particularly if it's breezy, but wear a better coat if you have one. It's a good backup if this is the only thing that you have, but remember, structure gear is generally the wrong choice of what you should be showing up at a staging area for wearing. PPE. First and foremost, consider wearing a helmet. Wildland helmets are a good choice for this. Rope helmets are a good choice for this. Some kind of headwear is not a bad idea. I'm always wearing a helmet on these if I'm walking in because I have a headlamp that lives on my Wildland helmet, and it's easy. It's already there. It's straightforward, and you're easier to see and easier to identify if you're wearing a helmet, especially if you're not in full Wildland gear or something like that that's obvious. Consider wearing a Wildland shirt or a brush coat or something like that. Something kind of brightly colored, something visible, easy to identify. Hey, these are the people that are coming to get me. So when the injured person sees you, they know, hey, that's a rescuer. I should get their attention so they find me. So brightly colored Wildland shirts, brush coats, things like that are a great idea of something to wear. Especially if they have that reflective trim, that's good at getting into night, dusk kind of conditions. Consider appropriate PPE for rope gear as well. If we're anticipating any kind of rope work, if it sounds like the victim's off trail, make sure to pack that helmet as a mandatory at that point, and then you'll need a harness and things like that. So remember to adjust those PPE needs if we're hearing that this is going to be a rope involved potentially incident. So list of personal gear, things that at least I expect you to have with you going on one of these incidents if you're well prepared. First and foremost, you need adequate clothing for the elements, whatever the elements are that day. So if it's 98 degrees, sunny, hot, terrible, you need to have appropriate clothing for those conditions. Don't be wearing your bunker coat and bunker pants on a hot day to go for a hike. That being said, have an item of warm clothing with you, be it a sweatshirt that's tucked away in the bottom of your pack or something like that, because as the sun comes down, these operations will always take longer than we thought. So sun starts to set, things get cold. You want that to throw on so you're not miserable and useless on the incident. Same with rain gear. Cheap ponchos, cheap raincoats, things like that. You know, something from Walmart level of inexpensive and terrible, totally a good thing to toss into your bag and just leave there. What I do, I carry all of this kind of gear in my Wildland pack. And my Wildland pack is the pack I grab for any hike out or any wildland fire. It's the same gear fundamentally. You just have a fire shelter and some fusees with you that you probably don't need if it's a hike out. But no big deal. It's all one gear bag and it fits well and it's an easy backpack to carry. So I throw it all into there. Think through your options yourself. So adequate clothing. Be ready for the conditions that day or what's expected to happen that night. Have some food, Cliff Bar, trail mix, things like that. Just a little bit of food. Doesn't even need to be a full MRE. If you want an MRE, hit me up. We have some up at Station 2. Have some food with you so that you're able to handle it if you're out there a long time and you don't start to get all lethargic because you're getting hypoglycemic. Have some hydration. You can't show up without water. I don't know how many times we got guys who are just going in without any gear and then they end up real thirsty, starting to get dehydrated, and it's a big problem. Especially if we're going longer than a short, hey, I see them, we're going to hike in a little ways and go grab them. Have water with you. Doesn't have to be a Camelback. Doesn't even have to be more than one water bottle. Just have some so that you don't get hurt and become injured yourself because you didn't drink any water. Have a light source. Headlamps are better, but some kind of light source is mandatory. Sun goes down, it gets dark. If you don't have a light source, you're probably going to get hurt because you're going to fall because you can't see where you're walking on the trail. Especially if we're walking with a Stokes basket, you need to see the ground in front of you and what's going on. It's not like basic night hiking where you can get away with just the moon and the stars. We need to see very, very clearly what's in front of us so we don't fall with the patient on a stretcher. You need to bring appropriate communication equipment, be it your 800 radio, be it a BK, something like that. We've got to have communication equipment. Take your cell phone with you too. It's a good piece of gear. It has a GPS built into it, and we have cell signal on a lot of these parks, so it's something to think about. Have some kind of gear for survival and self-rescue. Think through what that means to you, what you would need in the event that you're going to be stuck out there overnight because something went sideways and conditions have changed dramatically or we just can't get out tonight. Have that kind of gear. Just think it through. If you want to talk more about that, we absolutely can. Have a notepad and a pen. A cheap memo pad. You can buy a dozen of them for $1 at Walmart. I don't know if that's true, but get some. And a couple pens. They're worth their weight. Have them. They're worth carrying. And then last but not least, any mission-specific items. So if we're going in for a rope rescue call, have what you need for that or have whatever your officer is assigning you to carry. Be it a med bag, oxygen bag, something like that. Expect to have a bit of gear thrown on you so that you can hike in to get to that victim and be useful when you're on scene. All right, tools that we have as a department to effect rescue out there in the field. The most useful one that we carry is by far the Stokes basket. And the Stokes basket best friend, the wheel. The wheel is great because it means that we're not carrying the entire load of the patient on all of our rescuers. So that makes our operation so much faster and so much smoother. If we didn't have that wheel, we'd go through people a lot faster and it would be a lot more miserable of an operation. So Stokes basket with the wheel. Obviously, if we're doing rope work, the wheel is not a good choice. Detach that, you don't need it. But if we're not, we're taking this over trails, we're doing that kind of work, leave the wheel on the stokes. When we're doing rig checks, make sure that wheel is adequately inflated, because that's a real bummer when you show up on scene. Next most important bit of gear we're going to have is our medical equipment. Standard med bags work great for this. We're kind of set up to handle both conditions. First and foremost is treatment for shock. Especially when people are out for a while, that's going to be the real big issue that we're going to see. So IV fluids and the ability to keep the patient warm and comfortable. So bring blankets and some kind of weather protection. We do have emergency blankets in our med bags as well, so you can use those for a little bit of weatherproofing for the victim. We also have the vacuum splint. Instead of taking a backboard, because backboards are terrible and instruments of torture, we instead have the vacuum splint. Patient lies down on this, or we move the patient onto it. We contour it to fit them in a position of comfort. We suck the air out of it, and it gets nice and hard. So much more comfortable than a backboard, way better for the patient's experience, especially if we're going for a long time and taking them out over a long distance. Be prepared for extended care and transport of this patient. Think about the patient's needs over that time. It could take us an hour plus to hike this victim out of what it only took them 15 minutes to hike into. Think about rope equipment as well, especially if the victim's off trail. We may need to be bringing that sort of gear with us to build a rope system and to get them up a hill. Pay attention to what that search team tells you when they first arrive. That's why we send them ahead, so we know what gear to take and we know how to do this effectively. So, quickly talking about hazards and risks to us as rescuers in the field. Environmental is probably our first, foremost, and most obvious hazard that we'll see. The terrain itself presents a challenge. The Front Range, especially the initial bit of it that we're experiencing a lot, is steep. It's steep over a very short distance. It's pretty miserable, and it's a lot of fun for people to hike and bike on, but it's a pain for us to hike a lot of gear up and hike people down. So be aware of those terrain challenges. That's our first biggest hazard. Watch for loose rocks. Watch for stuff like that. That's a bit of a threat. Weather is our second biggest hazard. In the winter, snow can show up out of nowhere. In the summer, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, especially in the later half of the summer, we tend to get lightning storms. Things to think about, be aware of, and consider as these incidents evolve. Watch out for animals. Be it four-legged animals or no-legged animals, both can present legitimate threats. We've had a few snake bite calls, like we've mentioned, something to be alert for if seeing snakes out on the trail. Other stuff really isn't going to pay too much attention to us, but snakes are the real issue to watch out for. And then what I like to call a navigational breakdown. This is where someone doesn't know where they're going and they become a little bit, I don't know, Daniel Boone called it bewildered. So you can get lost, especially when these trails all start to look alike, and as the sun is going down or it's dark, if the victim got lost, you could get lost too. There are other hazards that we could expect to see as well. From a human perspective, as we start to leave the parks, the obvious parts of the parks or where we're on a trail, watch out for aggressive people who are defending their bit of the mountains. It's a legitimate threat that we need to think about and be concerned of. Not saying that everyone is necessarily out to do us harm, but be alert that there are people who may not have an interest in folks from the government, i.e. fire department, coming onto their land. As a part of that, there could also be traps, things like that, as a part of illegal marijuana grows or illegal operations like that. A bit of a threat. There's also unexploded ordnance in a few areas. We have some old mines in the district, so watch out for those. There could be old explosives there too. And our operational hazards, things that we do to ourselves in effecting this rescue, dehydration first and foremost. It's an injury that you can cause by working too hard and not bringing water with you. Exertion can put you into a fatigue state, and that's a real operational hazard. It's the same as being drunk. Poor communication is also a threat to us as well. Remember that effective communication needs to happen for these incidents, and we got to be alert to those needs. So, reminders to everyone before we get out there into the field. Your physical fitness is a key component of how these operations go. If you are not in shape and you are not able to perform as needed, in these incidents, you can be making the call worse for yourself and for everybody else. So stay in shape, go hike, go experience these trails, and at the same time, build your physical fitness. Also maintain your operational readiness. Know and understand your skills and knowledge that you need to make these rescues happen. Spend time reading, learning, gathering information. It can be kind of interesting, can be kind of fun, something to do. Practice the skills that you need. Go play with the rope gear when you get a chance. We'll have shifts when there's plenty of opportunity to mess around with this and gain these skills. And then make sure our equipment and your equipment are ready to go. Have your bag packed, have it ready to work on any of these days, especially when we're expecting a lot of people in the parks, and help make sure our team gear is ready to go. Check the Stokes basket, make sure it's got air in the tires and it's in good shape. Make sure all the rest of our gear is ready to go. This is all important to making sure that these calls aren't terrible. The only one you're shortchanging by not helping out and making this stuff work well is yourself. Because if we don't work together, we're all going to have a terrible time. So let's walk through the process itself. Fundamentally, these operations are very organized, very deliberate, and very structured. We shouldn't be going out cavalier, doing random stuff, effectively freelancing on these incidents. It's a bad idea and it presents a lot of danger to ourselves and others. So let's think about the requirements of a successful search and rescue operation. First and foremost, we need a clear and effective chain of command. Remember the principles of ICS. You only have one person that you report to, and we don't exceed that span of control. Make sure that we follow some sort of a chain of command. We need to have clear and effective communication. So whatever radio system works well for where that call is located, we need to use that. We need to be very clear with what we do, what we find, and what's going on. We need to have good accountability. We have to know who is where really at any time. Be it knowing which team is in which position, we need to know who's on each team. We need to have a very good idea who is in the backcountry and who is out of the backcountry, because talk about a terrible day if we leave someone out at a park overnight because we left them on scene because we didn't know they were still out there. We got to make sure we have good accountability for our personnel. And obviously we need to be well prepared, both mentally, physically, and with our equipment. Teamwork is critical to make these operations work, and we work together as teams. We have to have a minimum of 2 persons for any functional unit. We're not going to send one person solo. That's a bad idea, and it's not a recipe for success. And each team needs to have an identified leader. Doesn't matter if the team is all officers, someone needs to be the leader of that team, just for ease of communication so we work together efficiently. So the most common method we use to effect rescue in these search and rescue operations, as soon as we leave the roadway, is what I like to call the 2-team concept of operations, or CONOPS. So this means we're using 2 teams in how the operation proceeds. The first team is charged with locating the victim. They do a hasty search to the last known position of the victim along an obvious trail. We're not necessarily doing anything super detailed in this initial search. Their goal is to move fast and get to where we think the victim is. This is a team of 2 to 4 rescuers. It's a small team. We got to have at least 1 EMT on that team because their objective is to get there, find the victim, and start delivering medical care. So they carry aid bag, they carry oxygen, things like that to be able to deliver care, but they don't roll with the stretcher. This is important where if we have to move quickly or find the victim somewhere else, things like that, they can move quickly overland without the stretcher holding them back. Also, leaving the stretcher gives the other team the ability to carry gear more efficiently. So team 2, their objective is to bring equipment and then they help extract the victim. This is going to be 4 to 6 rescuers. So what do we need for an operation? Minimum of 6 people, more like 10 people is kind of an optimal team and how this works efficiently. This team 2 brings the more medical gear, so another bag of fluids, more oxygen, things like that. They bring the Stokes basket and any other gear that's requested by team 1. So when Team 1 finds that the victim's a little ways down a hill, they bring the rope gear. If we need LZ supplies, they bring that. If we need something weird, they handle it. They leave to go to the victim after we locate the victim. Obviously, if we can see the victim and they're right at the trail, this all goes out the window, don't worry about it. But if we're not 100% certain where the victim is located, or 100% certain about what resources we need to effect rescue, then Team 2 needs to wait until Team 1 finds the victim and gives a good scene size up and we know what gear we need. So, how does this flow work? Call goes out. Easy. First unit on scene arrives, establishes command. That incident commander needs to go talk to witnesses, figure out what we probably have going on. Often it's pretty easy. Oh yeah, Steve fell about a quarter mile down this trail. Okay, sounds good. Okay, this trail, draw it on a map, things like that. Figure out what we probably need. As we have enough resources for a first team to go out, so that's a minimum of 2 additional people and medical gear, then that Team 1 leaves to go locate the victim. They conduct that hasty search. They assess the condition of the victim. Hey, he's not very hurt, we can walk out, or he's super hurt, we can't walk out. So they develop a plan for what we're going to do to transport and treat that victim. Let Team 1 dictate what they need and what the plan is. They're on scene, they know what's up. Command is there to help. Once we know where that victim is and we have a plan communicated back, Team 2 goes. They bring in the gear needed for evacuation and that extended care. Team 2 works with Team 1 to transport that victim. We get them to wherever it makes the most sense, and then they go to the hospital. Life is good. So, our search tactics. Most common thing we do is the rapid or hasty search. This is quick. We're working fast because victim's probably somewhere easy to find, so we can get to them real quickly and be really efficient and really effective. Specifically, the tactic we use is called a route search. So we're going to follow an established route to locate that victim. This is quick because it's a real trail, and trails are easy to work on. People run on trails, so we can move pretty fast. Follow the trail that makes the most sense of where you think the victim is probably located, especially if he's located and your report is he fell on the Mustang Trail, for example. We're going to use the Mustang Trail to get to him. We're not going to try and do something creative and just go straight overland to get there. You're going to find something in the way and it's going to be terrible and it's going to take a while. So a second rapid search is the parallel route search. One searcher stays on the trail and then the other stays in sight, but they're parallel off of the trail. We can cover a lot of ground that way. This is as soon as we're not successful with that route search. Then we go to an area search. We can do a low coverage or high coverage. This is where we space out and wander and look for that victim in a very detailed and specific way. So, hasty search. Principles are we are fast and therefore we're pretty effective. 99% of the time, these people are hurt on a trail because that's where they were. They fell off their mountain bike when they're on the trail, so we're going to look on the trail. The objective is to search quickly and collect good information. This hasty search team is 2 to 4 team members. We're carrying medical supplies and other search supplies that we need. Something to consider, thermal imaging camera, especially if we're getting close to dusk and it's starting to get cool, we can find victims pretty quickly. What does the technique look like? Rapidly search the route to their last known position. So we hear they fell at this junction. So we're going to move fast to get there and at least keep our eyes open and see if we find them. Once we get there, look for signs or indications of movement. If they're right there, cool. If not, we're going to try and figure out their most likely location. Then follow the suspected travel routes that diverge from that area. Look for things like roads or other hazards where the victim may have wandered to, especially if you can see a road from that location and they're potentially lost or confused. See if someone can at least check on that road and see if the victim has started walking towards there, is hanging out along that road. So here's an example. We've got this, if anyone can guess what park this is. Anyone? It's a video. I can't really do this the same. So this is White Ranch. So what we're seeing on the left, that's the upper trailhead, and on the right, not quite all the way down to the lower trailhead. So let's say we have a report that the victim is located somewhere along the Longhorn Trail. Okay, so the Longhorn Trail is pretty long. So starts up here at the upper trailhead and ends all the way down here, but then it keeps going and it's this huge thing. So see if we can get any kind of information. Okay, it's on a steep part kind of near the switchbacks. That's up in here. So what does that first team do? They get there as fast as they can. So they're going to start from the upper trailhead because we work with gravity if we can. And then they're basically just going to search down and work their way to where we think that victim is located. If we find them there, great. If not, then we work our way up, maybe down. Is there a reason to work back up? Not really. So we'll work down, see what we can find along the trail. Note that it gets flatter, note that it's a little easier, so we'll find out more information as we go. Maybe we'll see some clues, or as we're walking in, people point out, hey, the guy's down that way. It's like, awesome, thanks, and then we find him. So our area search tactics are what we fall back to as soon as those initial hasty search tactics are no longer effective. So we've searched all the trails. We have checked logical routes proceeding away from trails, social trails, fire roads, things like that. No dice, can't find him. Make sure, obviously, that he's not at home and laughing at us as we're doing this. Something to think about, have law, go check if we know where the guy lives. So our search tactics, we have a low coverage area search and then a high coverage area search. High coverage area search is obviously going to take a lot more time and going to be a lot more resource intensive, but we're going to have a very, very high chance of finding anyone in that area. Low coverage is a step down, but it's not quite the same as a hasty search. So with a low coverage search, rescuers spread out to cover a large amount of terrain. Not quite within line of sight, but they can be a little further away. And then you make a nice kind of wandering pattern, generally covering that area and moving together as a team. Good communication matters here, but work your way through that search area, doing a pretty general look through, but getting off trail. If that fails, we go to the high coverage search. This is where rescuers are within line of sight of one another, and we slowly advance in a line like we're looking for hot spots or gritting for smokes. This is going to be a slow, methodical process, and it may be we're looking for clues. So we're looking for weird footprints, we're looking for blood, we're looking for signs that this person went this way, anything like that. The advantages, these are really detailed. So if this person is hurt and they've wandered away, we'll probably find the blood trail this way and we can follow them. The disadvantage, obviously, this is really, really slow. And if someone's critically injured, this is not what we want to start with because we're going to spend a lot of time finding them and they don't necessarily have a lot of time. Also note this is really resource intensive if we're trying to cover a large area. You're trying to search a given piece of map. If we're trying to have people within line of sight, that's a very, very tight space and we need a lot of people to make that happen. So let's see kind of what an area search looks like. All right, so hypothetical scenario, someone said that they saw this guy who got hurt. Maybe he was, I think I saw him when I was on the Maverick Trail, but I don't know, he looked like he was a little ways away. So what does that mean? They were on the Maverick Trail, was he uphill or downhill? Maybe downhill. All right, so here's an area we can start with. Maybe in that area. What do? We get rescuers along this line, and then we search down and look. This can be a pretty hasty or a quickly moving low coverage grid search. And if we don't see any sign as they all reach that trail, some sort of confining boundary to end the search, then we can cover more territory. We can come back and tie our way through. Or we can work our way further down like that. So we're using natural terrain features as a way to confine our areas and how we do an efficient search for someone who's off trail. Obviously, think about logical ways for people to move. So downhill is an easy way for people to go. They're going to take more gentle terrain versus really steep terrain. They're going to probably go towards water. And think about how that works in this area and where we're looking for that victim. Also, think that if someone sees a road, they may try walking towards that road. It could be a really long way away, like a large state highway kind of over in this area. If they see that, they could just start walking generally towards it because they see something. Hopefully they'll find a trail by the time they get there, but if not, something to think about and consider. So while we are searching, a couple of key techniques that make our search more efficient and more effective. First is attraction. We have got to be, as rescuers, easy for the victim to spot and therefore for the victim to communicate, hey, I'm your victim. Obviously, if they're on a trail and we're showing up with a bunch of fire department looking stuff and look like the fire department when we show up, it's pretty obvious that we're there to help, and we'll introduce ourselves. Hello, sir, you appear to be hurt. We'd like to help you. Okay, that's cool. But if the victim's off the trail, the victim needs to be able to see us. So be obvious in your visual appearance. This is why a brush shirt, helmet, not a bad option, something that looks like, hey, they're not normal hikers. Maybe they're here to help me. Make lots of noise when you're searching. If you know the name of the victim, call it out. If not, shout, hey, hello, can you hear me? Anyone out there? Things like that, so that you can get their attention and then they know, hey, look, there's someone here to help me. Also, we use a technique called confinement. So lost persons may wander. We've hit on that a few times. Think about trails, roads, or other features that would keep a victim in a given area. Someone's not going to swim across a lake. They're going to walk around the lake. If there's a road on the other side of that, we can hang out along the road or have deputies hang out along the road, and then we can search in the area between the lake and that road. It cuts down the area we have to search, and we can use that confinement technique to help figure out and confine our search as the victim is confined within a given set of terrain. So once you find the victim, first and foremost, where are you? Be it GPS coordinates or distance along the trail. Both are very effective. Distance along the trail is easy. GPS coordinates can be really easy too. Your cell phone's a good tool for this. If you have a standalone GPS unit, that's a great tool also. Think about that, how you're going to communicate that. Best case, hey, we're 1.5 miles in on XYZ trail. That is a very, very precise location, especially when you've got someone who's probably just going to follow that trail to get to you. So figure out where you are. Second, assess the victim in the scene. Can they walk out? Hey, I sprained my wrist. It's like, cool, can you walk out? Absolutely. Awesome. Situation's a lot easier. Team 2 can hang out, maybe walk in if they feel like it, but not super important. If they can't walk out, all right, you're going to need that Stokes, you're going to need to make this happen. So then think through what resources you need to get them out. Are they down a ways and we can't get the Stokes basket to them easily? All right, it's time for rope time. Do we need the stretcher? Can they walk or not? How seriously are they injured? And in this decision, do we need to fly them? Do we need to move real fast? Can we take our time? All of that comes into play. So see what the victim's condition is and figure out what exactly we want to do. Develop a plan for how we're going to get them out. Are we going uphill? Are we going downhill? Are we going to go back to the trailhead we started at, or are we going to go to a different one? Are we going to go to an LZ and wait for a helicopter to meet us there? Then, last but not least, notify command. Relay these critical details after you've figured them out with what we're going to do. Be very clear with this plan, and then stick to it or communicate any changes very, very clearly to command and the other teams. Victims need to be packaged prior to transporting them. Obviously, if they can walk, don't sweat it. But if they can't, the victim needs to be taken care of, and we need to deliver good care. Packaging needs to be secure. They can't fall off the stretcher when we're hiking. That's super bad form. They leave a bad Yelp review, and that's not a good time for us. Packaging needs to be warm. Even in the summer, we still need to think about that. As the sun gets down, remember it can get really cold. And if victims are injured, if they've bled much at all, we got to worry about hypothermia. You start to lose blood volume, hypothermia is a big deal. Then also think about access for treatment. What is their injury? What are we doing to take care of it? Do we need to leave an arm free and out of the packaging so that we can place an IV and administer meds? What do we think makes sense? Some treatment should be done on scene, some treatment should not. This is your expert professional judgment as a medical provider. What makes sense? What do we need to do on scene? Bleeding control obviously should be done on scene. If a guy has a major arterial bleed, do not start hiking if he is actively bleeding. Control it there. Wound care should probably be done on scene. Wash it out, wrap it up, package that wound nicely. That's a good thing to do on scene. It just does a good job keeping other dirt and debris and things like that from getting into that wound, and we're doing the patient a long-term favor. Also helps with some comfort. It just means that stuff's being done and it's better time for the patient. Also handle splinting on scene. Splinting helps a lot, making sure that they're not in as much pain as we move them. So take care of that if you can. Also think about IV access on scene. If you get that established, our AMR folks can consider administering pain meds. As we evolve with our protocols, we may also give oral pain meds at this point, just something to help them out and make this more efficient and a little bit less unpleasant for the victim. Then as we extract the patient, obviously we are getting the patient to the ambulance. That is our objective. We are not going to deliver definitive care on scene. If they're just lost, well, cool, just walk them to the trailhead, life is good. But generally we're taking an injured person to an ambulance. Move methodically. Don't be hasty in this process, because worst case scenario, we get our folks hurt trying to make this happen. So take your time. Don't be super slow, but be methodical and be efficient in this operation. Remember to provide ongoing patient care. Assess their condition. Talk to them the whole time. That's a good way to get a good gauge on their mental state and what's going on with things like perfusion and those sorts of injuries. Are they comfortable? Are they as comfortable as they can be, or are they just uncomfortable anyway? Take care of things like warmth. Make sure there's a good blanket on them. Make sure they're comfortable, especially if it's getting cool. And consider administering IV fluids, especially if we're out for a long time. We don't want them to get more dehydrated than they probably were out and about. Be alert to the patient's needs and their comfort. This is a big deal. We're walking an hour or two to get them out. This is a long time to care for a patient, and they can have other needs that show up. Patients can have a need to urinate while they're out there. Think about this, at least have it in your head of what we're going to do if the patient really needs to urinate. Also, if the patient's going to have to vomit. That can happen pretty suddenly without warning, so be alert for that, but think through it as we're packaging the victim. So, support and resources. First and foremost, we got to take care of ourselves. These operations can be pretty intense, and not intense like psychologically intense, but there's a lot going on. They're big, there's a lot of people, it's a lot of work. We have got to take care of ourselves. So we've got to do a good rehab for our team. Everyone is responsible for ensuring that everyone rehabs, but ultimately that comes down to the incident commander. Make sure that people are getting taken care of. Then it comes down to the team leaders. Make sure your team is drinking water and staying hydrated and being effective. Whoever's the medic on that team, it's your job to make sure the team leader is taking care of everyone and getting good rehab. What does rehab mean? This is adequate hydration for both the search and the retrieval operational period. As we're walking out, sip on some water, but I tend to move pretty fast, so I'm not really thinking about that. But when I get to the victim, I'll drink a bunch of water because I know I didn't drink any getting there. As we're hiking out, take breaks, get water and Gatorade, do a combination similar to what we do on a wildfire. Obviously don't drink only Gatorade, that's basically sugar water, but you may want to mix Gatorade in with your water as you're going water bottle, Gatorade, water, Gatorade. Not a bad idea. We got to have some kind of physical rehab, some kind of break. If we're going to be out for a really long time, and this is a really big incident, we've got to take legitimate breaks and either sub in a team or sub folks out, make sure folks aren't working themselves into trouble. This is a big deal. You can spend a lot of time out working. Your effectiveness goes down as you get more and more tired. It can be a simple, quick break. Hey, just go spend 2 minutes at the end of the line. Just hang out, whatever, catch up to us as soon as you're ready. Or, hey, just walk at the back of the group. Just take a second and don't be on the stretcher. That can help folks an awful lot. Remember to take some kind of mental rehab. Just detach from patient care, detach from the operation just a little bit. This can help you be more vigilant and more effective if we're going into a long and complicated search operation. So what resources do we have with our department? Thermal imaging I mentioned earlier, that's a good tool we can at least think about, especially as it gets cool out. The TIC is real easy to carry, it's light, it's small, throw it into a cargo pocket or something like that. It's something to at least think about if we're starting to get, running out of ideas and running out of options. Bust the TIC out and take a look. We also have the EUV. That works really well for parks where there's fire roads, things like that get into areas. But it's a handy tool. It can also make extractions a lot easier. We've got a lot of locations where that can get in really easily. And then we don't have to hike the victim out. We just walk maybe 1/10 of a mile, get them onto the EUV, and then just drive all the way to the ambulance. And then that's the easiest rescue in the world for everyone involved. Big other resource that we have that's going to be just on scene are the rangers. Be them from Jefferson County Open Space or Colorado Parks and Wildlife with the state park. They are phenomenal resources. There's going to be probably more of them than us, at least in the first bits of the incident, and they know these parks. This is their job full time, is to walk these parks, work with people, and understand what's going on. So they know where stuff is, they know what resources exist, and they're there to help. A lot of them have bikes, so they can get to the victim a lot more quickly. If they can give us a good size up and we trust them on that, we can combine Team 1 and Team 2 and just roll. They can also show us back roads, back gates, back entrances, cool ways into locations where we can just drive 80–90% of the way there and then just load them into the ambulance and make the rescue a heck of a lot easier than it was going to be. So talk to them, see what they think, see what makes sense, and work with that resource that we have in hand. Then last but not least, we got to think of our mutual aid partners. I'm calling these resources where it's going to take us some time to get them, and they're kind of different, and they're not automatically going to show up. First is going to be Flight for Life. They're useful in 2 ways. They can fly to locate missing persons just without any other questions asked. If we want them to, they have no problem getting in the helicopter and going to take a look. Especially at night, it's not a big issue for them. They run with night vision, and they are willing to do just search flights. Obviously, we can use them to transport, as we've done in the past. They're a phenomenal resource for transporting as soon as we're in a deep, weird, injured spot. If there's a good LZ and the patient's pretty badly hurt, they're a great way to get them definitive care and really make it a much simpler operation. In the future, we're also thinking about working with them to get qualified to bring rescuers to a remote location. So we find a victim somewhere, we locate them with some other resource, then we're able to fly them in using a flight's helicopter. Not in service yet, something to think about. Alpine Rescue Team is kind of our second tier of other search and rescue resource that exists in the area. They're the designated search and rescue team for Jefferson County as well as Clear Creek and Gilpin counties. So they may be busy, especially on in the summer on a weekend. There's a very high probability that they're out working already. It's important to note that they have a pretty long response time. That's because they're sending a lot of people. They go to their headquarters in Evergreen and then they move from there with a lot of equipment and gear. They are very, very capable in these detailed overland searches. As soon as our hasty searches have failed, that we haven't found anyone on any trails, anything like that, start to think about Alpine showing up and helping out. They're also very qualified and very skilled in rope rescue in the backcountry. Not quite the same in technical rescue, but they're very, very good in that backcountry rope work. Also in snow, they are pros. Good with avalanches, things like that, even though we don't get those that much. Next down the line is West Metro Fire. They're an extremely capable rope and technical rescue resource. Order tech rescue team from them. They will send you a rescue truck and an airlight truck with about a dozen guys who are super squared away in rope and technical rescue. The big thing is they are not a great resource for searching a large area. So think through what you want. We can't find the victim, think an Alpine. We know where the victim is, but it's going to be a total nightmare to get to him. Think West Metro. Last but not least is the Colorado MMA, or the multi-mission aircraft. The state of Colorado owns 2 of these aircraft that are designed to go do cool stuff from the air. Basically, they can search for us with thermal imaging, visual, anything like that, and they don't cost us anything. So we can call them up. They'll be happy to come fly for us if they're available. They'll fly around the area. They'll do a detailed search pattern. They can run thermal. They find some weird dude hanging out in the middle of nowhere. They can send us a picture of thermal and visual and a detailed, he's exactly at this location, and then that handles a lot of the search effort. So they're a great resource, something to think about, especially if we're starting to run out of ideas after checking all the obvious trails. So that does it. Just under an hour talking about Overland basic search and rescue specific to Golden Gate Fire. Obviously, if you're watching this not from Golden Gate Fire, don't deviate from your own protocols, SOGs, things like that. This is just how we operate and how we do things. Otherwise, wish you all safe, effective operations.